Hello everyone, welcome to ClearIAS. I'm Kaustubh, an educator here. In this lecture series, today we are going to do another very important topic which has often been asked both in preliminary and mains examination by UPSC. Today we are going to learn about the rise of Jainism and Buddhism, two religious sects that emerged on the cultural landscape of ancient India and had a phenomenal role in ancient Indian history. So, when we speak of these two religious sects, it is very interesting to note that it was in the 6th century BCE that we hear of many cultural sects, as many as 62, and especially in the region of Middle Gangetic basin, which was also a very significant part in the later Vedic period, as we saw that the Middle Gangetic basin came to be populated in the later Vedic period, and it also became a very prominent region in that part of history. And it was only during this time that we also see a whole new transition in terms of rituals and customs and rituals of various religious sects. For example, the Vedic rituals, they had evolved into a very complex structure, and it was only against this cultural backdrop that we see the rise of many more religious sects. However, we speak of Jainism and Buddhism as these two sects were the religious domains that gained a lot of popularity and also significance in the cultural aspect of ancient Indian history. So, when we speak of these two particular sects, it is very important to know about the causes of origin of these, or causes of rise of these two sects. So, the social causes, if we talk about, so it is to be noticed that if you would have seen the last lecture that we had on the later Vedic period, it is to be noted that in the later Vedic period, the Varna hierarchy gained prominence. The the people of the later Vedic period, they were often put into categories, the four categories that were devised, and they were Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. The Shudras were excluded from certain ceremonies, for example, the category of Dvij. If you would like to know uh, about the categorization, the social categorization, or the concept of Dvij, you could also refer to the previous lecture, as we have already discussed these themes there. And third reason is that women were not encouraged to take up Vedic studies. As we have seen in the later Vedic times, the status of women, it had eviscerated to some extent. Well, there are a lot of aspects where women still had their fair position in the later Vedic period, but it could be concluded that compared to the early Vedic period, the later Vedic period was not very good for women, and the notions of pure and impure were also more pronounced. With the coming of these four categories, the notions of purity and impurity, the notions of hierarchy were more pronounced, with Brahmins uh, taking the positions at the helm of the affairs, the Kshatriyas ruling, and the Vaishyas engaged in economic aspects. The Shudras were the ones who were taking up the service positions in the societies. So, the notions based on these social and economic aspects, they were also more pronounced. And now, when we speak of these social and economic hierarchies, the tensions were also there, because some sections of the society, they felt that they were not given their due when it came to the hierarchical positions in the societies. So they were not very happy with these social norms, and this added to the rise of new sects which defined the societies in new ways. So people were looking for an alternative rather than from the mainstream Vedic uh, systems. So it was only in this context that the rise of Jainism and Buddhism it became very important, because it helped people have an alternative view on the ways of living and on the societal aspects. Now, when we speak of further causes, there are economic causes as well. For example, the new agricultural economy in the regions of Uttar Pradesh and northern and southern Bihar was gaining prominence. So, when economy was changing, it was also having its impact on the social domain in that at that point of time. For example, if we speak about the if we speak of the agrarian economy, then the use of iron it became very important. And when the use of iron became very important, the farming, the agricultural economy, it required animals, and use of bullock required animals, and this somehow it reduced the status of the Vedic sacrifices, which also required animals. Now people required animals for agricultural purposes because life was becoming more and more sedentary. So now people were wanting to use these animals which were kept for pastoral purposes in the Vedic economy. They were now also put to agricultural uses. Also, there is a lot of discussion on these Vedic sacrifices that used to take place and which also used to employ a lot of animals. So now all of these animals, the economic sections, they wanted to use these animals to the agrarian purposes. For example, to be able to use them in bullock carts. Similarly, rise of cities like Kaushambi, Kushinagar, Banaras, and Rajgir. It was also seen at this juncture. Trade was improving, but not the condition of the traders. For example, if we speak about the four categories, so the Brahmins they occupied the ceremonial positions, the ones who officiated the ceremonies, and hence it was a very prominent position that was given to them in the social hierarchy. Similarly, the Kshatriyas they were the ones who were taking charge of the societies in terms of the rulership. But it was the traders and the Shudras who were seen to be left behind. So the traders who were of trying to officiate trade from one place to another, they were not feeling that their condition was improving, and hence it also gave them an opportunity to seek the alternate ways of life. And all of these economic causes, it it required people to put Vedic to make certain changes to Vedic economy, where animals could also be employed for agricultural purposes rather than keeping them just for pastoral purposes. So these were the economic causes of the rise of Jainism and Buddhism, because they gave an alternative view of life. So the characteristic features of Jainism and Buddhism, what was it that exactly defined these two sects? We are going to discuss here now. So the distinct features, the features that distinguished between the traditional Vedic norms and the new sects like Jainism and Buddhism are as follows. The shift from Varna system, it was a major breakthrough in the society, because by now it was quite clearly defined that the society was to be divided into four sections. And now, as we saw in the previous slide, that not all the sections were very happy. especially the Vaishyas and the Shudras. They felt that there were more avenues that were to be sought for them in order to improve their position in the societies. So Jainism and Buddhism, they did not really believe in Varna hierarchy. So now Vaishyas and Shudras, they were the ones who really appreciated, who really acknowledged this particular scheme of Jainism and Buddhism, because they did not really believe in the Varna system. So now these two communities, they had a very good chance to make a standing for themselves in the societies, and not be put rather than keeping themselves in the in the Varna hierarchy at a place where they were not very happy to be at. And now the second feature that really defined these two systems was non-violence, no wars among kingdoms, and hence better trade. The traders had a very good opportunity because of these two sects, and the first and the foremost reason for this was non-violence, and especially these two systems, they promoted harmony, and they did not really appreciate the wars between kingdoms, because they did not really focus a lot on economy and especially on materialism, and hence a better trade could be operated between kingdoms, among the kingdoms, and hence the traders, the Vaishyas, were very pleased with with the features of these two sects. Now, these two sects also fostered new economic systems like the lending of money, which the traditional law books did not really subscribe to. So a lot of traditional law books at that point of time, they were not very appreciative of the systems like lending the money, and especially of usury. But but these two systems, Jainism and Buddhism, they did not really derive their authority from these law books, and they did not really have any issue with lending of money, and lending of money, it further fostered and encouraged the trade among the in the kingdoms. So these were the distinct features, and one of the most defining features was simple living and in traditional ways. Now, if you see the very time period of these two sects when they emerged, Vedic period, it later Vedic period, especially as we have discussed in the previous lecture, it ranged from 1500 BCE to 1000 BCE. And now, if we speak of these two sects, they had come to prominence in around 600 BCE. And we have also learned that cities were also coming to forefront. This was also the period of urbanization. So we see a lot of it was changing, and society was going in transition. Now what really happens is, when society goes in transition like this and urbanization takes place, a lot of time materialism, it also comes to prominence in the societies. And whenever materialism comes, people would again like to go back to uh, people would again like to go back to the past. For example, very often we say, the especially the millennials, that okay, gone are those days of 90s when life was really simple, and people had a lot of time to interact with their friends, and they could go out of their homes and play with their friends. Now, with social networking and apps and phones and all of these things have really changed. So there is a lot of nostalgia for the older ways of living. Similarly, if it used to happen even in history, when the urbanization was taking place and when so many cities were coming up, when the life was getting busier, trade was increasing, societies were getting richer in a way. So there were some people who felt very nostalgic, and they wanted to continue with the simple ways of pastoralism, and they wanted to continue with traditional ways. So they also subscribed to the ideas of Jainism and Buddhism, which provided for simple living. Now, let us look at Jainism and the ways in which it prospered and the ways in which it was accepted by people. So, Jainism, when we speak of Jainism, it was Vardhaman Mahavira who was born around 540 BCE near Vaishali. It is with Vardhaman Mahavira that Jainism is often associated with with a lot of prominence around his personality. And it is to be noted that when we speak of Jainism, it should not be understood. Vardhaman Mahavira, he should not be understood as the founder of Jainism, because clearly Jainism had system of Tirthankaras, and Vardhaman Mahavira, he was the 24th Tirthankara of Jainism. And Tirthankara were the saints who added to the philosophy of Jainism. And as far as the first Tirthankara was concerned, or for that matter, the very pioneer Tirthankaras were concerned in the very formative years of Jainism. So it is also seen that some of the Tirthankaras, they found their names in Rig Ved. So Jainism, it did not start with Vardhaman Mahavira, but it came to a wider level of popularity during his time. And Vardhaman Mahavira, if you look at his background, so his father was the head of a clan and mother was a Lichavi princess. And it is to be noted again that his father was the head of a clan and his mother was a Lichavi princess, so it tells us that he came from an affluent background. In search of the truth, he left home at the age of 30 because he wanted to answer the more profound questions in life. And also, it is to be noted that it is again against the cultural backdrop of this particular time period that Vardhaman Mahavira, he had those profound questions, because society was changing and people were wanting to go back to the times when they had a simple living. So Vardhaman Mahavira, he also wanted to answer the profound questions that emerged, that arose against the cultural backdrop of this time period. So he left the home to answer these questions. After a quest of 12 years, he attained Kaivalya, or the perfect knowledge. Because of this conquest, he came to be known as Jina, or the conqueror. Jin is the conqueror. And in Buddhism, in Buddhism and in Jainism, the moment when one attains knowledge, the transcendental knowledge, it is very important. And in Jainism, it becomes very prominent. And in Jainism, it is called Kaivalya. And because of the fact that Vardhaman Mahavira, he attained Kaivalya, he came to be known as Jina, or the conqueror, because he meditated, and it is very difficult to meditate. He could have his thoughts in control, and hence somebody who can have his or her mind in control, he or she can be called a conqueror, and hence Jina for Mahavira. After rigorous preachings, he passed away at the age of 72 near Pavpuri, near Rajgir. So he passed away at the age of around 72 after having taken to Jainism to various parts of the subcontinent, if not directly, then indirectly through his teachings and through his disciples. Now, why did Jainism become very popular? Why was it that it came to the forefront of the cultural landscape of ancient Indian history. Like we discussed, these sects they encouraged non-violence, and it indirectly resulted as increase in trade because it promoted harmony between the kingdoms. It promoted harmony on animals which could be put to agricultural use. So the doctrines of Jainism they became a major pillar of its popularity, and the doctrines were: do not commit violence, do not speak a lie, do not steal, do not acquire property, observe continence, that is brahmacharya, and Mahavir asked to discard the clothes completely. So these were the doctrines of Jainism, and these were very, very important doctrines which helped Jainism reach people on a wider mass, and these doctrines also promoted trade, harmony, and they also were appreciated by the groups which were not given their due in the hierarchical positions of the society, or which felt that maybe they could also be better suited in the other sections of the societies, in the other sects besides the traditional Vedic systems. So when we speak of Jainism and its popularity, it is to be seen that around 14,000 followers were there for Mahavira, and 14,000 was a very significant number. I mean, it is a significant reach, and especially at a time when society was still evolving, population was very less, uh, I mean relatively less, and Vardhaman Mahavira had 14,000 disciple followers then. So that means that he had a wider reach even at that point of time. It did not mark itself different from Brahmanism clearly. And one of the major ways, by this we mean that one of the major ways in which Jainism could promote itself was that it did not come out as a radical sect. It did not become an iconoclast. It did not believe in iconoclasm, that it did not really intend to break all the norms that were in practice. It did not want to come across as a radical system, so it did not discard, or maybe it did not mark itself different from Brahmanism clearly. It did not project a message that it was very something very different from the traditional Vedic systems. So it stayed neutral in that position. It was a very new system, but again, it did not want to make this very highlighted. It did not want to emphatically say that it is a very new system. However, it is to be noted that in the later times, it was also gaining impetus when the ruling authorities were also aligning themselves the uh, with the Jainism. So, for example, Chandragupta Maurya, we hear that he he gave a lot of patronage to Jainism, and it was only in Great Famine in Magadha that Jainism took to south. Now, if we speak of Jainism's rise, then there was a famine in Magad region which created very difficult situations for the people. So now the followers of Jainism, a lot of followers of Jainism, they wanted to take refuge in the southern region of India, and uh, spread of Jainism took place in south as well, and especially in the regions of Karnataka, and this is how Jainism was spreading in different regions of the subcontinent through the followers of the sect. And spread of Jainism around 300 CE, establishment with the establishment of the Basadis, or now popularly known as the Sthanakas. So there were different institutions that were also sprawling during the rise of Jainism. For example, the institutions like Basadis, and now we have a lot of institutions like Sthanakas that are seen, and they were the ones which helped Jainism see rise in popularity. So it is to be noted that the that the Jain followers who took refuge in the southern regions, they were called Bhadrabahu, and the ones who took refuge in the northern regions, they were called Sthalabahu. And also some of these followers, they were Shwetambaras, because they wanted to adopt ways of life in which they were wearing only white clothes. And on the other hand, there were followers who were known as Digambaras. So Digambaras discarded the clothes completely, and they felt that that the that they were already wrapped between the sheets of the sky and the earth. So the contribution of Jainism now. The contribution of Jainism is also very important because it created a lot of changes in the society. One of the first traditions Jainism was one of the first traditions which actively engaged with the Varna system and the Vedic rituals, which had become complex. Now it was one of the first sects that enabled people realize that there could be ways to practice spiritualism which could be more than that of sacrifices. The Vedic sacrifices were becoming very complex for people, and not everybody could perform them. So Jainism gave them an alternative view that in order to please gods, or for that matter in order to have that spiritual growth, one could also attain that spiritual insight by choosing the other practices. Jainism, in terms of the cultural realm, it discarded Sanskrit, and this gave rise to other languages. Now Sanskrit was a very prominent language, as we saw in the Vedic times that Sanskrit was a very prominent language, and the Jains, they discarded Sanskrit. Initially, in the initial phases of Jainism, Sanskrit was not a language that they opted for, and this gave rise to a lot of other languages, because if not Sanskrit, then what else? So certainly it gave opportunity for other languages to flourish. For example, the Jains adopted Prakrit language, and many dialects emerged out of it. For example, Shauraseni, which is also a parallel to Marathi, present day Marathi. So it also emerged from somewhere indirectly from Prakrit language. Similarly, religious literature was written in Ardhamagadi. Texts were compiled in 6th century CE at Vallabhi in Gujarat. So Jainism, it certainly had a lot of impact on the literary traditions in early Indian societies, and this was a very important aspect of this particular sect. Now let us talk about Buddhism, and the founder of Buddhism was Gautam Buddha. So Gautam Buddha, or Siddhartha, he was also a contemporary of Mahavira, who founded Jainism. And Gautam Buddha was born in 563 BCE in a Shakya Kshatriya family in Kapilvastu. His father appears to have been an elected ruler of Kapilvastu, heading the Republican clan of the Shakyas. So we see that both of these personalities, these luminaries, were contemporaries, and also Gautam Buddha's father, appears to have been an elected ruler of Kapilvastu, and he appears to have headed the Republican clan of the Shakyas. So, can we pick up a similarity between these two personalities? The similarity is that they came from an affluent background, and also their fathers seem to have uh, to have been heads in their respective regions. And about Gautam Buddha, it is again seen that he belonged to a Kshatriya family. So again, we see that Kshatriyas were very prominent in the societies at that point of time, and Brahmins, as we have seen in the Vedic times, they were already very prominent in the societies. So now it was the time for the traders, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras who wanted to gain prominence in the society. So these two religious sects, they gave them these opportunities. Speaking of Gautam Buddha, his mother was a princess of Koshalan dynasty, and therefore Gautam belonged to a noble family. His mother was also a princess of Koshal dynasty. So therefore Gautam belonged to he had a very noble background. Looking at the sufferings around him, he left home at the age of 29 and gained enlightenment at the age of 35 and gave his first sermon at Sarnath. So, when we speak of Gautam Buddha, it is a very similar, the lives of Gautam Buddha and Vardhaman Mahavira, they have been very similar to each other, because Vardhaman Mahavira, he also left home around the same age, and Gautam Buddha, he gained enlightenment at 35 and he gave his first sermon at Sarnath. So all of these luminaries, they had to spend some time in a lot of thinking, a lot of meditation, in order to have a better insight on on life and societies. After propagating Buddhism, he passed away at the age of around 80 at Kushinagar, Nagara, which is now in present day UP. So, just like doctrines of Jainism, Buddhism also had its own set of theories. For example, Buddhism propagated eightfold path, which was right observation, right determination, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right exercise, right memory, and right meditation. So for Buddhism, it was very important to have these set of this set of eightfold path, where a person was supposed to have a very uh, sattvic kind of a lifestyle, where a person would have a good thought for everyone. The good thoughts, they eventually led to good determinations, the humble determination, the noble determination. And when a person determines to do something good, it automatically translates into his or her speech. Good speech or right speech, it leads to good actions. When we do good actions, then we lead to a good, our livelihood, it automatically improves, and we have righteousness, which is reflected in our livelihood. And similarly, we have right practices, right exercises there. And then these right practices and right exercises, they lead to good memories, that we do not want to remember anything that can fill our heart with angst. And when we have this kind of clean thought process, we can meditate in the right way. So Buddhism, it just advocated a lifestyle which was full of righteousness. The doctrines of Buddhism were to not covet, to not desire the property of the others, to not commit violence, to not use intoxicants, to not speak a lie, because Buddhism considered lie an abomination, and similarly to not indulge in corrupt practices. So again, we see that for Buddhism, it was very important to keep non-violence at the center, and this non-violence translated to a better behavior towards animals and to put them to a better use in agricultural practices, and hence the Shudras and the Vaishyas, they were inclined for towards Buddhism for both social and economic reasons. And because Buddhism advocated non-violence to a great extent, the fights between the inter-tribal and the the political conflicts, they were also sought to be resolved with non-violent means, and hence it promoted better trade. And these doctrines, they helped Buddhism grow and prosper. Now we see the causes of the spread of Buddhism. So Buddhism did not really engage with the questions of soul and God in a very conventional sense. Buddhism, because the later Vedic period, when especially when the Upanishads were coming up, so they were already dealing with a lot of philosophical debates. And now the idea of philosophical debates had reached to a point where the common people may not have been very easy, very comfortable with these aspects of philosophy. So it was these philosophical systems which dealt with with the questions like what is soul, what is God. Either people did not really saw the relevance of these philosophical questions directly onto their lives, or they did not really understand these concepts. So Buddhism also did not really focus on these aspects in a very direct manner. In fact, these were the questions on which Buddha also remained silent. Buddha did not deal with these philosophical questions because were because he felt that there could be more important questions that people needed to answer. Also, it transcended the Varna system and attracted people at the lower strata of Varna hierarchy. So, Buddha, he accepted people from across the spectrum of hierarchy. So, the ones who did not find their position very suitable in the Varna hierarchy of the Vedic systems, so they were the ones who accepted Buddhism, and women were also part of the Buddhist institution called Sangha. So women were also given importance in Buddhism because as we saw that in the later Vedic systems, the relevance of women, it was kind of compromised to an extent. But it is also to be noted that uh, very often Hinduism and Buddhism, and especially Brahmanism and Buddhism, they are seen as antithetical to each other by some people. But it is to be noted that both of these religious realms in the ancient Indian society, they emerged from similar historical context. So of course they also had their own they also had they also functioned on similar lines. For example, if we say that uh, the position of women was not seen very progressive in the later Vedic times, then even in Buddhism, it is an anecdote that when one of the disciples of Buddha, he asked him about the admission of women in Sangha. So Buddha replied that if I would have wanted Buddhism to prosper for 1,000 years, now with the admission of women, it will be able to prosper only for 500 years. So certainly we see that the position of women, it also had impact on the thought of the social thought, cultural thought of these religious systems. Coming back to the spread of causes of spread of Buddhism. Pali as a language also helped its growth. So Buddhism adopted Pali as its language to translate its to transmit to disseminate its ideas, and the code of conduct, the Dhamma, was important. So for Buddhism, three pillars of Buddhism were considered as Buddh, Sangh, and Dhamma. So Dhamma was the normative tradition, the norms of Sangha that were very important, the duties of a follower of Buddhism, and which was mainly to focus on non-violence and other aspects. So Buddh, Sangh, and Dhamma, these three were very important aspects of Buddhism. Just as we saw that Chandragupta Maurya, he gave patronage to Jainism. After the adoption of Buddhism by Ashoka, it became very popular, and also not only just popular, but Ashoka also made sure that Buddhism also reached in the regions of Southeast and South and East Asia. Now, when we speak of these religious sects, it is to be seen that Buddhism, though it gained a lot of popularity, it also saw its decline. By 20th century CE, Buddhism almost became extinct in India, despite of being a sect which was so popular in the subcontinent, when the ancient Indian ruling authorities also made sure that they sent missionaries to the farthest areas for the rise of Buddhism. The sect saw its decline in such a way that by 20th century CE, it almost became extinct in India. It did not fight the evils for a long period. The reasons for which Buddhism fought, especially for materialism, and it advocated simple life. It did not really want people to adopt material life. They were exactly the same principles that were adopted by Buddhism, and especially by different sects of Buddhism in the later period. We might just cover certain some of these aspects in the next lecture. And Buddhism also gave up Pali and took up Sanskrit. Now, Buddhism could give an alternative literary tradition to the subcontinent, but it, though a lot of work of Buddhism, the formative years of Buddhism are in Pali, but it eventually took up Sanskrit. Brahmanism was seeing revival. Brahmanism was again, because if Buddhism and Jainism were coming to forefront in the 6th century BC, so Brahmanism was also reinventing itself, and it was also trying to understand what were the problems of people and what was it that the society wanted. So the Brahmanical traditions, they also revived themselves and made Brahmanism a simpler tradition. And now the cult of bhakti, and especially with the rise of the Sanskrit epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and especially during the Guptas, the Brahmanism, which was which had become very complex in the later Vedic traditions, it was becoming more simpler during the it was becoming very simpler in the later times, and especially during the Guptas. For example, we have a lot of ways in which the Brahmins also tried to convince people that it was not very difficult to attain God or to attain moksha or to attain liberation. For example, I'll give you a very simple idea. There is a whole section devoted to Vishnu Sahasranam in Mahabharata, thousand names of Vishnu. And in that particular section, it is said that okay, if somebody chants these names for almost on daily basis, he or she would be able to get liberated. So, Brahmanism also devised ideas in which it became very simple for people to have that spiritual growth without getting into the deeper ideas of philosophy. So, when Buddhism and Jainism were competing, not just it would not be appropriate to say competing, but when they were gaining prominence, so Brahmanism uh, was also reinventing itself in a lot of cultural ways. So the life of monks was getting easier with the rise of Buddhism, and the revenue collection by Buddhist monasteries was also seen. Initially, it was the system of patronage by the ruling authorities, but now there were regions where Buddhism had such a huge control that the monasteries were receiving revenues from people. So it also added to the to the decline of Buddhism, and it was all culminated with the invasion of Turks who targeted Buddhists. So these were the causes of decline of Buddhism. And significance of Buddhism, if we speak of the important aspects of Buddhism in which it has added to the growth of the subcontinent, so it has to be credited for the inequalities that it brought to the surface for people to acknowledge. It gave people a very different idea about life. It enabled to see them through the hierarchies that were created in the later Vedic systems, and it helped people understand that there could be harmony, there could be equality amongst them. So it was a very important aspect of Buddhism, and it really helped its growth. People could acknowledge that yes, there were inequalities and they could be fought with. And the second significant aspect of Buddhism is that it also tried to eradicate a lot of evils. For example, poverty, it breeds hatred, and Buddhism tried to eradicate these aspects by keeping life very simple, and it helped people understand that there was no reason to hate each other, because it enabled people to see the importance of non-violence. Similarly, it also enabled people to have a better sense of being by escaping poverty, and because it advocated middle path, neither riches nor poverty. So Buddhism, it tried to have a very balanced view of life, and this is what it enabled people to see. And this was a very major aspect of Buddhism which really helped it grow and sustain for a very long period. And this is why Buddhism is very important in Indian history. So today we have been able to cover the ways in which Jainism and Buddhism, two religious sects, they came to the forefront in the cultural sphere of ancient Indian history, and how they grew and what were the reasons of their decline, and in what ways were they similar, in what ways were they different from the traditional Vedic systems. In the next lectures, we are going to look at some more aspects of Jainism and Buddhism which have not been covered in this particular lecture, and in the next lecture we are also going to look at some of the previous year's papers which have looked at Buddhism and Jainism and how these two areas are very scoring in nature. So these are certain things, themes and questions that we will be looking at in the next section. Until then, keep watching videos of ClearIAS. Like, share and subscribe if you like the lecture. Thank you, students. Thank you. Prepare well.